Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to the Castle Dracula Horror Movie Podcast. On this podcast, we talk about horror movies, vampire movies, and all-around awesomeness. And this week, we kick off our Comedy Horror Retrospective with Ghostbusters.
Yay.
Bear in mind, and we're already excited, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the Alex Van Helsing series from HarperCollins and the upcoming game Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows from Activision. With me are, from Austin, in Austin tonight, Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running webcomic Halloween Man, contributing writer to Rockabilly Online, and writer of the upcoming issue from Tales from the Grave from Monsterverse Comics. Say hello, Drew.
There is no Drew, only Zool.
Only Zool. In New York tonight, in the home of the Ghostbusters, special guest Adam Foshko, screenwriter and creative producer for the highly successful Skylanders series, as well as Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, the viralicious horror action game Prototype 2, and the upcoming Call of Duty Online, which sounds so awesome. Say hello, Adam.
Hello from New York.
Hello. It is so cool. I am right now screening Ghostbusters in my little office and watching those guys run down the streets in New York. So it's so cool that you're there. And as always, also in Denver, Colorado, with color commentary, host of the mom-oriented podcast Pod Moms, the woman who is probably embarrassed to be with us every week, attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
I think that we should have Adam be our special correspondent in the field every time we want to have, like, on location, you know, somebody just in the place where the movie was filmed. So if it's filmed in Scotland, we just send him to Scotland, and he calls in from there.
That would be great because he could be like, you know, American Werewolf in London. He could be there at Piccadilly Square.
We'll be like, we haven't had any on location lately. Let's call Adam and have him go to Australia.
It's a great idea. And even though I am currently sort of in the corner apartment in Spook Central, please do not do Subspecies or Subspecies 2. I really don't want to go to Romania right now.
Did Chud take place in New York? I'm trying to remember if
Chud is in New York.
Yeah. And does it count if you're in Toronto but it's supposed to be New York? Which would we have to send somebody to if a movie was in fake New York? That was actually Ukraine or something.
Friday the 13th, Jason Takes Manhattan, obviously.
The great thing is you could spend that entire podcast on a boat, and it would be appropriate. But anyway, okay, Ghostbusters is, in case you didn't know, a 1984 American supernatural comedy film directed by Ivan Reitman and written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis. The film stars Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, as three eccentric parapsychologists in New York City who start a ghost-catching business. Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis co-star as a potential client and her neighbor. It was released in the United States on June 8, 1984, and made $240 million. The American Film Institute ranked Ghostbusters 28th in its list of the 100 top film comedies. All right, I don't know how to put together first impressions of this, but we're going to do it anyway. And we're going to start with probably the biggest fan of this movie. So let's go first impressions. Drew and Adam and Joya, and then I'll go. So Drew, let's keep this. I know that you want to go off on this, so try to avoid your.
You have a 3-minute limit.
Right. First impressions, Ghostbusters.
Well, I knew this was a big deal when this movie was coming out when I was a kid because we skipped church to go up to Wichita Falls and see it.
Wow.
That's how I knew this was a big deal. And this has literally been my favorite movie since I saw it as a little kid back in the 80s to this point. Like, you know, some people, their favorite movie fluctuates around. Nah, my favorite movie unwaveringly is Ghostbusters. In fact, I am looking at an original Ghostbusters poster framed that cost me $500.
Wow.
I love this movie so much. I still have my Stay Puft Marshmallow Man that I've had since I was a kid when the movie came out. I love this movie. I consider it to be possibly the perfect movie. All hail Ghostbusters.
So tell us how you really feel, Drew.
All right. That's wonderful. All right. Adam, first impressions. well, lay it on us. From New York City, what are your first impressions of Ghostbuster?
Well, I mean, I look at it from the, I saw it again recently, and I got to tell you, I mean, this is still a picture that, I think holds up in a lot of ways. It's not that different from when I initially saw it. As I was going through New York today and drove past the New York Public Library, I really thought about, staying there and actually having this podcast, from the area really where the first paranormal incident occurs, more or less. Mm-hmm. But it would be hard to because it's now almost 11 o'clock here in New York. So
you'd be sitting on the steps, like under the stone lions, talking on a cell phone. I could just be on we used to do this Skype somehow with video, and I could have done that. That would have been great. But,
then we would have heard as Adam got mugged and out in the street.
Yeah, that would have been
Hey,
awesome.
Come back here with my phone.
Where does your concept of New York come from, Julia?
From before.
From like the 80s, from like
the 80s,
that whole Death Wish period.
Another time.
Sort of like the pre-Ed Koch sort of times. The Taking of Pelham 123 New York, the first one with Robert Shaw. But
we should definitely talk in this discussion about New York and how New York has changed. I mean, how New York of '84 is different from New York today.
Oh yeah, it's completely downtown. It's entirely different. But if I look at Ghostbusters as I did recently, I drive through New York or take a cab through New York, more likely. This picture is very much a love letter to New York, very much the same way that Woody Allen, I think, has often been said, when he makes pictures, he writes love letters to New York, but in a very different sort of way. But this picture holds up remarkably well. So this was one of the first pictures with Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis we didn't really know so much, I think, coming out of Lampoon and that sort of stuff. But I mean, it was Saturday Night Live. It was still a carryover from SNL. So we really only seen Bill Murray in pictures like Meatballs and Stripes and things.
That's true.
And I think that this was the first time where we really began to see first of all, a mixture of genres take a hold so well. It's an overlooked twist genre, a blended genre of comedy, sci-fi, or comedy horror in a way that isn't dark. I mean, it's done on a level of sketch, but sustainable throughout the entire picture. And it's actually a well-articulated and well-structured screenplay, but with great effects that still hold up. But I think it was seeing him and Aykroyd now in a vehicle that you could kind of get behind, and you could really see it be something that was not SNL. It was something entirely on its own that really appealed to us, people who liked horror and sci-fi and comedy and SNL, and we're kind of getting behind these guys as they were kind of coming out of SNL, and I think it was the first picture to really I don't know, it deserves to be in the top 100 pictures because I think it really is kind of a classic film of its type, and with those characters. So,
before we go on, I just wanted to I wanted to keep you to the same 3 minutes.
Did you say 3 minutes, not 30?
Standards are the same across the board.
I have a time difference here just because.
He gets an hour and 3 minutes.
No, but
this isn't Back to the Future. This is Ghostbusters. Okay.
All right. Julia, lay it on us. What are your first impressions of? I'm not Drew. It's not my favorite movie of all time, but for sure I have great memories of this film, and I've always loved Sigourney Weaver, and for some reason this is what I think of her as even more than the Aliens movies or anything like that. But I just think Bill Murray is just so fantastic. I mean, I was reading that pretty much every line he says is ad-libbed. Like, he just kind of didn't say anything from the script. So I mean, it's such a great vehicle for him. And then, of course, the script is actually written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, so they just, of course, are perfect in it. And then, I mean, just even all the minor characters, Annie Potts and all that.
I mean, it's just so great, Rick Moranis. So for me, it's more about the characters, the actors, and the scripts than it even is about the effects and all that. But it's so memorable, you know, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and all that. I mean, the girls, my kids were saying that they had been hearing about him somehow, like just in pop culture, it just comes up. So they're like, "What? So this is the movie that the Giant Marshmallow Man is from? Show us the Giant Marshmallow Man." So I had to go back and show them the
that's cool.
Marshmallow Man. So yeah, I mean, it's a classic. It's an awesome film.
That is really cool. Okay, for me, you know, a couple of weeks ago I think it was this exact crew. Adam, were you on Dark Shadows? You were on Dark Shadows, all three of them, right?
I was on Dark Shadows, yeah.
Yeah. So I made this comment where I said that really all I demand of a movie is that, you know, it has a few things that I can hold on to that are memorable. But this really makes me realize that I'm often way too forgiving. There's a lot here. There's so much good stuff here, and you know, like you said, the minor characters are great. But I think what I like most is the tone of Ghostbusters. That it has a few kind of broad moments, but generally speaking, it never gets very broad. It always stays extremely tongue-in-cheek, but it's so finely calibrated. There's never a moment when you're like, wow, those jokes just didn't go off, that gag just didn't work, I've just spent 5 minutes watching this and all of this is really cringe-inducing. There's none of that. This is a really well-calibrated comedy.
Can I say what differs between this and, you know, there's a lot of the other movies that we're going to be doing as far as this retrospective. The monsters are humorous, but they're never portrayed as not dangerous, and I think that's an important key to the tone of this movie.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. All right, so I think the place to start as we start going through it is I think we should start with the Ghostbusters themselves. I mean, the leader, basically what we've got, and that's also where the movie begins. The movie begins by introducing us to a group of scientists, actual scientists with actual PhDs, at least in the universe of the movie.
And let me add it from my my extensive trivia research that I find on IMDb. They actually filmed it at New York University, NYU, and they filmed his office is actually an office there, but they only let them use it on the condition that they wouldn't ever mention that that's where they were.
Are you sure it was New York and not Columbia?
Yeah, no, I think NYU.
Okay, well, fair enough. Anyway, they are parapsychologists doing work at a university, and we meet three of the original team. And Adam, Drew, anybody, tell us about Bill Murray in this.
No, you're right, Columbia. You're right. I'm sorry. Yes, stand corrected. Columbia.
Who wants to take on the kind of character that Bill Murray is playing?
I will say. Go ahead.
I feel like Bill Murray, I mean, he's not quite as cartoonish, but I always think of him as very similar to the sort of characters that Groucho Marx would play in the Marx Brothers comedies, is that he's this very quippy, odd man in a world where everybody else is a lot more straightforward.
Yeah, so the world is his straight man.
There are faces he does. That what I love about watching Bill Murray in this. I mean, in everything, every moment. Like from the very first thing that happens. Okay, well, the first thing we see is he is basically hitting on a girl by doing his quote unquote psychic experiments, where he's administering electric shocks to this poor guy who is not able to guess what is on the back of these little cards. But he doesn't administer the shocks to this cute girl that he's hitting on, and it's a silly scene, but it's a good way to introduce him as somebody who's not serious.
By the way, that girl was Gwendolyn Pierce from Charles in Charge. She was the girlfriend on Charles in Charge.
All right. Well, there's something else. There's something else about this too, and you guys will appreciate this. And that is, it very quickly introduces him to us, Venkman to us, as a multifaceted character. It's not one thing we're seeing him. as. We know that he's a womanizer from, not just his shtick, but also from, Venkman Burn in Hell being scrawled on the office in lipstick. The thing that he does with the guy, he goes to schmooze up to the girl, So we know that he's, very quickly that he's sort of in this game, not as a serious scientist. He's there to meet girls.
Right.
He obviously has a long history, that has not gone well. And incidentally, I'm sure Drew has done this because he's a giant fan, but I read the book. There was actually a novelization that came out. And just for those that are curious, Venkman actually had a terrible string of dates with Dan Aykroyd's sister in the Ghostbusters universe. Apparently that went very badly.
Who wrote the novelization for Ghostbusters?
I'll have to look that up. I don't remember. But I actually own that book somewhere. But that's
probably worth something.
I'm dying to know if it's like Alan Dean Foster or who would have. Let's see. Well, anyway, it looks like
you have to look that one up.
Larry Milne. Larry Milne was that sounds fantastic because it would have probably been based on a shooting script, which is not necessarily, where.
There's a lot of extra background and things sort of thrown in. But what's interesting is he's a very multifaceted character, not just based on the stuff that he was sort of making up on the set necessarily, but just the way they chose to introduce him and them. It was kind of interesting.
Well, that's not actually even how the movie opens, though. The movie opens at the library, where the librarian is a cop by the ghost.
Poltergeist, yes.
Yeah, and I was we were laughing that the part where the card catalog just explodes. Basically, we were thinking that anybody watching it now would probably be like, any younger people than us, would probably be like, what is that? What are those drawers full of cards?
What is
I hadn't thought of that. My mom's recipes? What are those?
Well, yeah, it's a gag that you couldn't even construct today.
Yeah.
It's like having a microfiche.
Right, no, exactly. Oh, yeah, all those scenes in old movies, like The Changeling and what have you, when they go to the library and they bring out a box of microfiche and put it in there and they use the little wheels to, scroll around and stuff, that's gone, man.
Am I the only person who owned a microfiche machine?
Probably.
Oh, my God, yes, but I totally used one. I totally used a microfiche for, my history thesis I wrote almost entirely using microfiche. Because I had to look at these 17th century diaries, and the only copies I could get were on microfiche. I bet that's not even there anymore.
Google Books now.
Gets interrupted to go to the library.
Well, wait. So what I was impressed with about Bill Murray's character, though, is everything about him. From the moment that he, anything that his partners are saying to them, when he first sees a ghost, anything, he always has a look of extreme irony. He literally is not sure or cannot believe the injustice of the world that this thing is happening. That somebody is saying something to him. There is always a layer of humor between him and the world. And it just he seems like a very real person to me. Probably not a person that you would necessarily want to spend your life with. I don't know, but it's an amazing character. He's always.
What is the line that Sigourney Weaver says about him sums him up very perfectly. She says, "You're not like a scientist," and he says, "They're pretty stiff usually," and she says, "You're more like a game show host."
Yeah, that's a good line.
But what's funny is that he is a scientist. That occasionally he'll come out with a line that is intended to remind us that for all of his shtick, and all of his irony, he's still just as much a trained scientist as the rest of these guys. Maybe not. He doesn't know his stuff as well as Ray, because Ray makes fun of him for quote unquote never studying. But he's still more of a scientist than the rest of us. He's, he belongs in the Ghostbusters. That's the funny thing is that, and then of course Winston is not a scientist at all. But yeah, so we have. Go ahead.
Winston you know, in most movies, it's kind of funny that they bring him later, but he does sort of serve the purpose of the everyman character because the other characters are so eccentric. Winston is a more sensible, blue-collar kind of guy and therefore more relatable to most of the audience.
Well, when they originally wrote the script, they wrote it with the intention that it would be Eddie Murphy, and if it had been Eddie Murphy, he was going to come in pretty much at the beginning. But then once Eddie Murphy couldn't do it, they ended up just kind of introducing him later on so they could have more time with their other...
You know, I'm glad it's not Eddie Murphy, as amazing as that would have been, because I think Ernie Hudson, you know, just brings this level of believability to it, and the fact that he isn't so instantly recognizable as Eddie Murphy. And I actually sat right next to him at my table once at San Diego Comic-Con, and I got to talk to him, and he's an extremely nice guy.
Awesome.
He was my favorite thing about what's the movie where they go to the jungle to find a bunch of intelligent apes and
Congo.
Oh, Congo.
It's not a great movie, by the way. I mean, you know, sometimes I really think I'm living in an alternate universe because somebody will literally put Congo on like their list of favorite films, and I'm like,
wow, really?
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. I saw somebody the other day go. There have been good movies based on Michael Crichton books like Congo, and I thought, whoa, you lost me in the first sentence of your article. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, Ernie Hudson was quite good in that.
Well, and actually, the whole movie would have been different if they had done it the way it was originally, how they wrote it. Like I don't know how to construct that sentence.
Are you talking about Congo? Or?
No, this movie.
They could have made that good.
When they wrote the script, they originally wrote it, and I'm saying they because I don't know if this is referring to the first version that Dan Aykroyd wrote.
Why don't you give us
But anyway,
the history of the
Louis Tully, that was played by Rick Moranis, is supposed to be played by John Candy, and he actually was cast and started acting in it, but he kept wanting to change things, and they didn't like his changes. They kept rejecting him. Kind of, you know, we always call it like, you know, treating him like Worf, you know, where just kind of everything gets dismissed. And so he wanted to make him a German character, and they were like, no. He wanted him to have a dog, and they said no, or two dogs. So he quit. He left. So then it was Rick Moranis, and then Peter Venkman, Bill Murray's character, was originally supposed to be John Belushi. I'm not sure why he didn't end up doing it. So it would have been a very different film.
Didn't John Belushi die?
Oh, is that what happened? Is he died?
Well, I don't remember when John Belushi died.
Yeah, you might be right.
I remember reading somewhere that the Slimer ghost, which was actually called in the script Onion Head.
Right.
But the ghost became...
And in the book, he's called the Godfather.
Yeah.
The Godfather.
Yeah.
But yeah, that they thought that the ghost was the Slimer was the ghost of John Belushi. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that must have been what it is. That's when he died. Huh.
Wow. Okay, and then of course you've got Venkman. You've also got, of course, Dan Aykroyd, who is and as a writer, I look at this and I love how distinctly these three guys are sort of carved out from one another. Because you've got Peter Venkman, who is endlessly ironic and doesn't seem to see, and he never really learns his lesson in this movie, he doesn't seem to see the value in taking anything very seriously. Then you've got Dan Aykroyd, who is extremely earnest and excitable. He's also the true believer. I mean, he really does believe in the occult, and he believes in what he's doing. He's not approaching it necessarily fully scientifically, or he's totally engaged with it, you know, entirely emotionally and intellectually and whatever else. I mean, he's a true believer. He's the heart of this group. I mean, he's the, if we use that Dramatica quadrant, I don't remember exactly, but I know that
one really?
Always, You've never used that? I love it though, because you always have like.
No, I have. That's why I'm calling it out.
Yeah, you have the protagonist, the antagonist, the contagonist, the mentor, and then of course in your ride-along characters you've got You've got logic, you've got emotion, and then you've got sidekick and one more ride-along character. But regardless, logic and emotion. Here you are. You've got Ray as the emotional one, who's a true believer, and as you point out, he's also the one who sacrifices. He gives up all of his money. He mortgages his house.
Well, and he's the one who at the end confronts the demon.
And he's the one who
beautifully
really wants to buy this firehouse. But confronting the demon, tell me about that, because I seem to have forgotten that.
No, when he goes, Gozer comes out and he says, and Bill Murray says to him, "Go get her." So he goes up and he's like, "I demand that you blah blah." He like makes all these demands, and she goes, "Are you a god?" And he goes,
that's right.
"No." And she's like, "Then you will die," or whatever. And
the best line in the movie.
If somebody asks you if you're a god, you say yes. So what's the best
and
line?
these are really words to live by. It still makes it an incredibly quotable picture.
Yes, so quotable. That's absolutely. I just kept writing down lines that I just loved as it went through. Just everything. Most of them are Bill Murray, but there's Annie Potts, which she goes, I've quit better jobs than this. Ghostbusters, what do you want? When she answers the phone.
Oh, yeah, okay. All right, Annie Potts plays, and I know we got to get to Egon, but first we should stop off at Annie Potts, who is their sidekick, basically. She's the secretary that they hire, and she is as cute as pie, this, I guess, 20-something, sarcastic, kind of mean and snipey secretary.
She has like a little romantic relationship kind of going off on the
and she's
side.
in love with Egon.
Yeah.
Yes. So Egon is Harold Ramis, and he's, who was Bill Murray's buddy in Stripes, and here he plays like a more extreme version of the character he played there. He's just so extremely scientific and just nerdy in like an old-fashioned way, and completely oblivious to the fact that Annie Potts is in love with him. I can't remember if they ever developed that plot.
Well, they do, and apparently there's a lot of stuff that they cut out that was about. They had like a whole subplot about that, and they ended up cutting it out for time, I guess.
Well, it still works pretty well because they give us a lot of it. They never give up on the fact that Annie Potts is in love with Egon, so that's our group, and so they're so well differentiated from one another. And I watched this movie, and I keep thinking, I could watch a hell of a lot of these guys. They could have a weekly show. I would be fine with it.
They did have a weekly show.
Yeah, it was called Saturday Night Live.
Well, no, I think, Drew, are you talking about the cartoon, right?
I am talking about the cartoon, which I ate up. You guys are a little bit older than me. I was in prime demographic for all this stuff.
Tell us about the cartoon, because
the cartoon was called The Real Ghostbusters, because there was another cartoon called Ghostbusters that they put out immediately after the movie became popular, which was based off of a 1970s show with Larry Storch.
Right, Larry Storch thing. Yeah,
their kind of way to cheese off those people were like, well, this is The Real Ghostbusters, and it didn't have any of the people from the movie doing the voices, but it caught the sort of back and forth snappy patter pretty well, and it's a very well, people in my age group, it's a very well remembered show. And
I seem to remember they had a decent, like the guy who did Venkman did a decent Bill Murray impression.
Well, he's the funny,
doorman, basically.
The funny thing is it was the same guy that voiced Garfield, and then later on, Bill Murray ends up voicing Garfield in the Garfield movie.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Weird little synergy there.
Carlton the Doorman, also, that is actually the doorman on Rhoda, which I think only lasted about 6 months.
But
so.
the Ghostbusters cartoon, a lot of the episodes are written by J. Michael Straczynski, so they had a nice sci-fi edge to them. Very few cartoons during that time period did not talk down the kids, and that one was it treated you more or less on a more sophisticated level than I think, say like a pup named Scooby Doo or whatever, the Goat Life, whatever else was on, at that time period. Very, very, very fun cartoon.
So yeah, I mean, and I know that ran for a number of years. I mean, you're exactly right that I think whatever the heck I was doing, I think I was like off in college, and so the odds of me necessarily catching any given episode of it were slim. But I do remember that it was really smart. And I remember there was one episode that I came across where the Ghostbusters are in Hollywood, where somebody is making a movie based on their lives, and they find out that the stars are, Murray, Aykroyd, and Ramis, and they say that sounds like a law firm and not like a bunch of actors. And I thought that was brilliant. Yeah. So these are great characters, and now having said that, I just said I'd love to see more of them. I remember people weren't crazy about Ghostbusters 2, and maybe let's get to that later on in the conversation, because I don't want to necessarily get into that just yet. So we talked about the Ghostbusters themselves, and they go as soon as they establish themselves. They basically establish themselves first by getting kicked out of their university and having to set themselves up as ghost hunters, advertising and all. And their first successful gig is Slimer, is this green thing that is haunting this old hotel.
And let me say, you said advertising and all. Let me say that apparently Ray Parker, when he was asked to write the theme song, he was coming up blank. He couldn't think of anything, and he was up against deadline. And then he saw the movie. He noticed that they had that ad, where they're just
we're ready to believe you.
Yeah, exactly. And he was watching an ad on TV, and he just suddenly got the inspiration to make it like that. But it was based on this commercial that he saw. I can't remember what it was for. But watching television.
But an exterminator kind of commercial about call the tough guys or whatever. Yeah. So they get hired to go out and we first get to see this amazing equipment that they've built. What's that, baby?
I said, of course, he got sued for in the who did I tell you was that that sued him and the company?
They got sued by Huey Lewis and the News.
Oh, right. Yeah, because if I want a new drug, they thought it was too much like I want a new drug.
But in the long run, which song do you think is better remembered?
Right. No, both of them equally. Those are both exceptionally good songs. But I think Ghostbusters is one of the greatest.
Ghostbusters is more famous, though, for sure.
Yeah, you're right. But then that's probably why they ended up settling, because I'm sure that there was some idea that this song is making way too much money for us not to get some of it.
Yeah. I was really surprised to hear that, and there are some great mashups of "I Want a New Drug" and the Ghostbusters theme. If you want to hear how similar they are. I don't necessarily think it's honest to God plagiarism. I think it's exactly what you have these guys today. You can hire a firm and say, I don't know, okay, I'm doing a commercial. I want a song that sounds like Poker Face. And there are guys in this country who are really, really good at writing a song that is just this side of exactly like Poker Face, but not quite, so that you can avoid a lawsuit while essentially having the same song. I think that's sort of what happened here. But Ghostbusters is a great tune, so hey.
And, by the way, a really great music video for the time.
Awesome music video.
I love this. Yeah, I agree. Heck, man, I like this video for now. I think if you...
Well, because it's so much fun, because it has so many cameos, which is always a fun thing.
The cameo,
right, and it was on full, and it was really on massive rotation at the time. There wasn't a whole lot else. There was a bunch of stuff, but it was the heyday of MTV, really, and a lot of stuff. This got played a lot.
You're right that you couldn't really escape the Ghostbusters video, and everybody shows up in it. If people don't remember,
Peter Falk shows up in it. You go, what's Peter Falk doing in this?
Yeah, Al Franken, which I guess makes more sense. But it's Ray Parker Jr. in this girl's apartment as he sings to her about calling to Ghostbusters, and she's in an apartment made up entirely of basically, neon furniture.
And billowing sheets, yeah.
Right. It reminds me a lot of the Cars video of
all of them.
Yeah. Anyway, it reminds me of a Cars video. I've forgotten which one now. Anyway, and it just keeps cutting back and forth to, Ray Parker dancing with the guys who play the Ghostbusters and basically every star in Hollywood, which means to me that people had a feeling that this was actually going to be a hit. It seems like you can't call, the eternally grumpy.
I think everybody had friends. Is kind of what it came down to.
Yeah, I think it's just their friends. I mean, it's like Chevy Chase. Of course, they all know him. And then it's just random actors, and John Candy, who we talked about, was supposed to be in the movie. Danny DeVito shows up in it. Melissa Gilbert randomly. Carly Simon, which is really random. Terry Garr, and then George Wendt, and just random other people like that.
Well, it doesn't shock me that Carly Simon shows up, given Aykroyd's ties to music, with House of Blues and kind of whatever else.
I guess so. I guess
and
all
time on
ties
SNL,
together.
whatever else.
Yeah. So, boy, where were we? Okay. Anyway, once they manage, they catch one ghost, and then that cements their reputation. And so then we have a long montage where they're getting extremely famous because, for whatever reason, there's this new burst of.
And the montage is over the song.
Right. And they don't know yet why, but for some reason there's more ghosts than normal in New York, and so they're really busy and they're getting famous. And this is like a superhero movie. When a traditional superhero movie, you have the intro at the beginning, and then they have the montage where they do a whole bunch of superheroics. And then,
it's funny you say
the Sigourney Weaver thing. Oh, here we go.
I'm going to get to the Sigourney.
No, but that's before.
It's funny you say that it's a superhero movie. I've always said that this, up until the point where they made The Incredibles, always said this was a good template for a Fantastic Four movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nathan, I'm sorry.
What I was going to say, Julia, and to your point, is that at the end of this montage, we catch back up to a character who we've seen briefly and we didn't get anywhere with, but now she becomes the plot, which is that Sigourney Weaver is staying at this apartment building that is getting more and more haunted, and I can't remember how the movie manages to slow down to start working on her plot.
Well, because what happens is before they get famous, she shows up. She's the first client that walks in and shows up and says, I've got this going on at my house. This eggs have jumped out of their carton and fried on the counter, and I open the refrigerator and there's a hellmouth in the fridge. So Bill Murray shows up and he sees the eggs. So yes, that happened, but there's nothing in the refrigerator except, as he says, lots of junk food, which I didn't really perceive myself, but whatever. And so then he's like, okay, well, I'll look into who this Zool character is that you told me about. So then, because they have no internet, so of course she can't just look it up herself. And so so then after they become famous, she sees him someplace in the street, and is like, oh hey, and have you? Or actually, I think he comes up to her. And she says, do you have any information for me? And he's like, yeah, I looked up Zool and whatever. So that's how it kind of comes back to her, and he starts telling her what he's learned. Okay,
I have to ask everybody, if you know New York, and I don't know New York all that well, where is this fountain that, she's walking out of work, he meets her in a fountain in a plaza. She's with her, I don't know, maybe semi-boyfriends because she works in the symphony and he's another musician. And Venkman meets her in this giant fountain, and I swear I've seen it before. Is this a famous location in New York? Or
Isn't it outside the Met?
I mean, I actually don't know. I just could swear that I've seen this location for other conversations in the movies, basically. But yes, okay. So Venkman says, "Hey, I looked it up. Zool's a big bad guy, I think I'm trying to remember how it is that they."
Zool is a demigod, as a minion of Gozer.
The minion of Gozer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but that whole plot really doesn't completely gel until several things happen. First of all, the EPA, led by William Atherton, who does nothing but play slime balls, comes to visit the Ghostbusters, and
at the point by the fountain, by the way, he sets up a date with her. So that's where he's going to go from there. But yes, so then we have William Atherton, right?
And by the way, the fountain is at the Met. I'm looking at it now, so it is the Met.
Very good, awesome. Yeah, I know that I've seen this in other movies. So Atherton, you know, who was also the scumbag in Die Hard, and I could swear in other movies.
Whoa, yeah, he was that. But, you know, before that, we saw him in Sugarland Express. The 5 people who are alive today. I saw that picture. But this was the first time you really saw him. It's the first time that an 80s audience, I think, was introduced to William Atherton. And then later we saw him in Real Genius. But this is the one think that, you know, for those of us that saw him and went, wow, he's really great. What else is he in? And we saw him in Sugarland Express. We went, what is Sugarland Express? It was in the 70s. He was like another guy in it. He had a huge role in it. But, you know, this was really the picture, I think, that began to make him kind of famous. So it was I think it was a pivotal breakout role for him.
Can you explain
there's a story on the Ghostbusters DVD that came out a few years ago where he was talking about how he thought that this movie was starting to get forgotten. Because he said when it first came out, he would go anywhere and he would be nothing but recognized as this character, and it was like getting into like the early aughts. He thought, oh, no one remembers Ghostbusters anymore, and he said he was walking down the street and a school bus rolls past him, and then suddenly the windows all lower and a group of kids go, "Hey, Dickless!"
Poor guy.
That's awesome.
He's so great, and yeah, he comes by and Venkman completely doesn't cooperate with him because he wants to know more about how they are. Basically, the Ghostbusters are capturing these ghosts. We'll take it for granted that all their technology works, and it's all pretty wonderful. But they're capturing these ghosts and then trapping them in this so-called.
Well, apparently, Aykroyd actually talked to a nuclear physicist about this. He came. You know, who knows if the story is actually true, but the way Aykroyd tells it is he went to a nuclear physicist and he said, okay, let's say ghosts are real. And they exist a little bit in our world and a little bit in another one. How could I potentially capture one? And this is somehow this technology, or the germ of what became this technology, was what was given back to him.
Wonderful. Well, that's what they've got. They've got this containment unit, this locker, this grid.
Well, but before that happens, that scene,
right.
He's back. He goes to meet with Sigourney Weaver. She has already become, she's already been taken over by this Zool character. And I'm sorry, not Zool character. She's the gate. What is it?
She's Zool.
Well, Zool is the gatekeeper. There is no Dana, only Zool.
Yeah, she's Zool.
She's the guy. That's right. So she's Zool, and she's the gatekeeper. And so he comes over, and she opens the door, and she says, "Are you the keymaster? I'm the gatekeeper." And so he says no. So she closes the door. So then he knocks again, and he says yes, this time smartly, and goes in, and like she's all possessed, and there's all this great stuff where she levitates and everything, which by the way is a real magic effect and not a visual effect. Like they actually did the physical effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and so she's in there, and she's trying to get him to get it on with her, and he says, I make it a rule never to get involved with possessed people, which I like.
Yeah.
That was a good line. And then he goes back out to he drugs her, and he sleeps back. He goes back out, and meanwhile, Rick Moranis, while he's having a party, has been chased out by Demon Dog, and so Demon Dog has taken him over. So now he's the keymaster. And so the two of them.
These are two people who are here to hearken the return of this demon called Gozer.
Yeah. And Rick Moranis gets taken over at the Tavern on the Green, which I thought was kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when
nobody cares.
And nobody cares. So now we go back to what you were saying, Jason, which is that Bill Murray shows back up at the fire station where Dickless is.
Well, Atherton has two scenes. There's one right before he goes to Atherton shows up before Venkman doesn't get along with him, so Astron goes away and says, "I'll be back," and he comes back.
With a warrant, right?
He comes back, and it's this really tense-ish scene where he says, "I want to shut this machinery down," and so the city workers that he's brought with him do shut down the machinery, and of course it unleashes all of the monsters that they have, all the ghosts that they have trapped, now go wild all across the city, and we get now yet another montage. This time of the ghosts just terrorizing people all around New York, which is the funny thing. It's the thing that I actually remember the most when I think back to this movie is Slimer eating all the hot dogs in a hot dog bin, and
there's a zombie somehow driving a cab.
Right. So the dead walking the earth, all that stuff. And then, basically, just to wrap this up, because I don't want to make us go too long. Bottom line, what happens is that eventually the mayor realizes that only the Ghostbusters can save.
But wait a second. That was interesting. Is when they shut down the containment, that is the sign that's been foretold.
In Revelation.
Our prisoners will be released.
I don't think I connected that. I don't think I connected that. You're right.
No one knew what it was going to be, and then, oh my God, that's the effect. It's Rick Moranis who comes out and
Rick Moranis says it to the horse.
This is the sign.
Look at this. All prisoners shall be released. You're right.
Yeah,
that's absolutely right.
So then, when they're talking to the mayor, trying to convince him, that's when Bill Murray has that wonderful line where he says they were talking about how it would be chaos, and he was like, "Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria."
Yes. God, that's right. So. Basically, what ends up happening is, just like Spider-Man, the city knows that it needs the Ghostbusters, so the Ghostbusters head on out to the apartment building where the two minions of this demon Gozer have set up on a...
Well, Gozer, it's important to note, Gozer is not a demon. Gozer is a god.
Aha. Okay.
That's the whole thing, right? What's interesting is, and this kind of ties off the other little sort of subplot, and that is Rick Moranis finally has sex with Sigourney Weaver, but he'll never remember it.
Right.
That's a good point.
Well, can I say how different casting was in the 80s? I mean, not only do you have Rick Moranis making out with Sigourney Weaver, but point of fact, your romantic lead is Bill Murray. opposite Sigourney Weaver, who is, although an attractive woman, not conventionally attractive.
No.
And these are your two leads, and I think nowadays you would end up with a much more generic-looking cast, even if you were...
She's an unusual-looking woman. I mean, I think she's gorgeous, but I think she's very unusual.
She's beautiful. She's still beautiful. I mean, when she shows up at the end of Cabin in the Woods, she's still beautiful. But... not conventional looking, and everybody in this movie is unconventional looking, and I think if they were to remake this movie, they would populate it with, I don't know, underwear models the way they always do.
Well, so Sigourney Weaver would be, but Bill Murray would still be a Bill Murray-ish kind of person, I think, probably.
It's funny to me, Bill Murray at this moment.
It'd be Seth Rogen.
It would be it'd be Ryan Reynolds. They'd want somebody good looking.
Oh.
Well, I mean, but they've got that new movie right now called This Is the End, which is full of I mean, I think there's still a lot of room in a comedy.
Seth Rogen is right.
So I mean, I think you're right that Seth Rogen would play this part now.
I think Seth Rogen would be Ray. He's not Venkman.
Well, Vince Vaughn is Bill Murray.
Wow.
I could see Vince Vaughn. I could see.
Yeah.
Bill Murray. Vince Vaughn does sort of have that ironic thing that Bill Murray did.
But please don't remake Ghostbusters.
Well, okay. All right.
Yeah,
we should talk about the finale, and then let's talk about the extended universe and the remakes in this.
Yeah, please don't strangle Drew's childhood.
Really?
All right. So that I have no doubt that will happen. But okay.
I'm surprised it already hasn't.
Bottom line, what actually goes down is that the god, as you point out, yes, the god who looks like sort of an evil Sheena Easton is up there on the top of the building, and she says that the Destroyer, I think she calls him the Destroyer,
the
great
Destructor.
force, the Destructor, this great force, this godlike thing, is going to come in the form that they will choose. Their doom is set, but they must choose the form. And they go, okay, well, I think Venkman's the one who figures it out. He goes, well, that means that let's just not choose anything. And so they clear their minds, except that poor Dan Aykroyd.
Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah, he thinks of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Because he thought, who is someone who could never have heard us and never would do anything?
Which is an amazing left-hand turn, because really, who thought the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was going to show up and start smashing up the city? Nobody.
It is. You're right. Okay, thank you, Adam, because it is. You're right. That is when this movie just goes, whoa. It's such. I mean, it's so hard to write a good third act,
Mm-hmm.
And that's truly amazing. You've got this giant marshmallow man.
Maybe going back to my earlier statement about Fantastic Four movie, for people who say the audience would not be prepared to accept Galactus as face value, I point to this, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
So he is a giant, he's a giant marshmallow man, and so they decide, well, we can, through a lot of mumbo jumbo and technobabble, they decide.
Well, they say cross the streams, which
cross the streams
previously was
at the portal, and we'll blow up the portal, and we'll suck the marshmallow man into it and blow him up. And that's sort of what happens. They do a lot of that, and they roast him, and so they become heroes when marshmallow gets splattered all over New York. And all over the EPA guy, Walter Peck, who, by the way, apparently initially they were gonna drop like 75 pounds of shaving cream on him, and he was like, I don't think that's a good idea. And they were like, no, it's fine, it's shaving cream. And he goes, 75 pounds is 75 pounds, doesn't matter what it is. And they're like, no, well, you'll see, we'll show you with our stunt man. So they dropped the 75 pounds on the stunt man and completely flattened the poor guy. And then he's like, yeah, I'm not going to be doing that. And they were like, okay, we'll do like 30 pounds. Right. And it's a good wallop of marshmallow he gets anyway, or shaving cream that he gets. So, I'm screening the movie right now in my office, and the Marshmallow Man is walking. So. Well, there's something you don't see every day. Yeah. Oh, and, what a wonderful
church
line.
in my town.
They, at the end, of course, our guys are heroes, and again, just like Spider-Man, the city of New York loves the Ghostbusters, and they spend most of the closing credits just sort of maneuvering out of the parking lot in front of the building, and being heroes, and people pounding on the car and stuff like that. Priests blessing them. Yeah. All the priests, all that stuff. All the Hasidic Jews are lined up. Everybody in New York is there, and that's the end. So why? What happened? If this was so good, how come it took until 5 years later for there to be a Ghostbusters 2? If nobody knows, it's fine, but I'm just curious if anybody. It took 5 years to be a Ghostbusters 2 that nobody liked, and there hasn't been a Ghostbusters. You
know what? I like Ghostbusters 2. I think it's underrated. It's not as good as the first, but there's certainly worse movies.
Well, I think looking back on it, you can go, okay. I think when we all ran in and went, yeah, it's going to be. I think Jason said earlier, it's like there was Batman. I was like, well, okay, Batman. Keaton's in it? Wait a minute. Keaton? I was not going to be like, Ghostbusters will be fine. We'll all watch Ghostbusters too. And just the fact that it was like a complete switch. It was like, there was Keaton who was good, and there was Nicholson who was great, and then there was Ghostbusters 2, and we went, wow, it doesn't have the same elements working that kind of made the first story successful.
I think if Ghostbusters 2 commits any sin, honestly, is that it's not different enough. It follows I mean, it even goes so far as that it sets them up basically as losers again.
Yeah, they're
at
failures.
the beginning of the movie,
which
I think was a mistake. It's a mistake because it's a downer way to start the movie, but it's an entertaining flick. And honestly, the Vigo, or actually around Christmas time, Ghostbusters 2 wouldn't be a bad movie to do, but. The Vigo character is a very, very interesting conception for a monster, as far as like a bizarre, evil painting. I mean, that's a stroke of weird.
I enjoyed
genius.
him using the. Just as Adam pointed out, like the same weekend, if I recall, if not certainly the same month, but the same weekend that Batman came out, Ghostbusters 2 came out. We were all looking forward to it. And I remember the plot involves, I think Vigo is going to use the bad feeling of New York.
And it's not the Vigo stuff necessarily. Think of it. One of the things that really isn't working, right? The Vigo stuff is fine, except you have a giant monster at the end. But it's the Bill Murray, Sigourney Weaver story where basically they're divorced or separated or something, and you're like going, wait, what? And they have a kid? What? And
wow,
I'd
completely forgotten that.
And that's it's the third part of the sort of the stool where you're going, wow, I'm missing something that gave it some buoyancy while they were sort of building up the big bad and doing all that other stuff. And that's that's kind of a problem they got. You're right, Drew, that they do a lot of the same things to a T. Dopey guy Rick Moranis, dopey guy the curator, who was in.
Oh, that's right. It's McNichol, Peter McNichol.
Yeah, and he was great now in McBeal, and he's certainly entertaining and goofy in this. You've got a big bad, and it's all great.
Well, they even have a giant creature, although this one's at the end of the movie.
Totally true. But one of the things one of the things you could say about this is that it does begin on this weird sort of left foot and is a big downer. You're totally right. But it also lacks the buoyancy that the first one did, because you're starting, the third part of it is this whole bit with Sigourney Weaver and Bill Murray that's sort of absolutely starting off in the weeds somewhere. It doesn't really get a whole lot better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
so kind of a drag.
I think that was the wrong, it's the same kind of thing that, actually, I think people find this unforgivable about a lot of movies, is when you open up with the characters in true misery, sometimes it's just hard to get out of the bummer that they're in,
I think it would have been a better movie if they would have just started it off where the movie, the first movie had ended, where they were successful paranormal investigators, and there would have been adventures that we had not seen.
Why not just have it be a Ghostbusters adventure? You're exactly right, and I think sometimes it's that the writers get sort of slave to these concepts that you have to the character has to be really downtrodden, and then he has to go through certain things, and then.
Well, what did people like about the first? What did people like about the first one?
To me, what they like. And what I like is just the sense. Honestly, there's so much joy to it. Even when these guys are losing their jobs.
I'm saying that the producers were probably what did people like about the first one? We have to repeat that.
We have to repeat it exactly, and that's. I mean, that's what happened with Superman Returns. Really, Superman Returns hits most of the beats. Yeah, but the funny thing is it hits most of the beats of the original Superman almost exactly. It's just that, why would you do that? Why have him rocketed to Earth again? And why have, and so there's just so many misfires. But Superman Returns we can try to get to another time if we can figure out some excuse. Okay.
Listen, Jason, I'm not going to Krypton to cover that. I'm sorry.
Right?
Well, there isn't anything
of Kansas.
Yeah, there isn't anything of Krypton left.
I think Kansas is the place to go.
It was all ashes. So actually, when did Ghostbusters 2 was 89, and then that was sort of the end of that. I think. But the funny thing is, then after 10 years had gone by, people were in a forgiving mood, and so suddenly they were like, well, okay, so when are we going to see Ghostbusters 3? And then began the long death march to no Ghostbusters 3, where every 6 months or so, Dan Aykroyd would do an interview with some magazine, or Bill Murray would do an interview with some magazine, and say, well, maybe scripts on, and then nothing would happen. And
well, what's weird is, let me interject here. There was a period, in fact, fairly recently, and you guys will know this, that a lot of that energy that was sort of going into a sequel, which, by the way, got an update like earlier this year, went into this interesting left-hand turn when Vivendi was still sort of a company that was making video games, and Ramis and Aykroyd and a guy that I know had actually poured some of these ideas into the Ghostbusters video game that got released. So it sort of became like the that
was a way to keep it alive. I mean, that was certainly a way to, to keep the story going.
I kind of hope they never do Ghostbusters 3. Like, even though I love Ghostbusters, like every time they have revisited something. When they revisited Star Wars, it was incredibly disappointing. And, when they revisited Indiana Jones, everybody was like that.
But about the remakes, like Psycho or whatever, it's like, well, it's fine, but who needed that?
That was a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, which was, I don't know, I found it a little disappointing. But that's,
that was more of a, I think of the shot-for-shot remake of Psycho is more like a strange film experiment that somehow Gus Van Sant managed to get his studio to actually release, which I guess.
Apparently as of May of this year, the newest sort of information was actually that I think Murray had said that he didn't want to do it, and then Aykroyd was sort of talking about it, and the thing apparently where it's, take it for what it's worth, but it seems that the idea would be, if they were going to do it, they would be, casting new people. They would find a way to sort of, there might be a role for them somewhere, but really it would center on a new generation of Ghostbusters.
The next generation. Yes, it would be a Ghostbusters The Next Generation, which I could actually kind of live with. To be honest with you, I could live with the notion of another generation of Ghostbusters in the same universe, and Egon and Venkman and whoever wants to be there are still alive, might be in the movie, might not. I heard Aykroyd say the same thing. He also said that he was completely at home with the fact that Bill Murray was not going to participate. And really, come on, we know that Bill Murray is not going to participate.
Why?
Because Bill Murray wanted out of this stuff in 1984. His deal to do Ghostbusters was, I will do Ghostbusters if you will fund my complete misfire of a remake of
Razor's Edge, right? Absolutely.
Yes.
and by the way, and he has basically reinvented himself as as an actor.
Yeah.
And doesn't necessarily need to sort of dip down into this exact thing.
He's totally okay with doing a cameo in Zombieland, where it's nothing about Ghostbusters.
And that was a great bit.
Yeah, I have no disrespect for Bill Murray. I think he just, he didn't want to do this anymore, and that's okay. Hey, this is the second Bill Murray movie we've done.
He's done some incredible stuff since then, man.
Yeah,
one of my favorite movies are Bill Murray.
But let's be honest. I think that in a lot of people's eyes, this is the definitive Bill Murray role.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, definitive.
Mr. Strife.
Definitive in terms of the humor side, but then he goes off and does some wonderful drama. It's just, there's some great stuff, like Lost in Translation is one of my favorite movies of all time.
What's the one about the kid, about the 8th grader who puts on
Rushmore?
The expensive, right, yeah. Rushmore.
This is part of there's he's not, he's in the process, not of maybe reinventing is the wrong word, but continuing to sort of stretch and define kind of like what he's doing, and can dip back into sort of broader comedy or whatever else. But I think that there's sort of a facet of Bill Murray that we find very satisfying in a particular role. This is one of them. Stripes is one of them. I hadn't really, gained an appreciation of The Razor's Edge, and I don't think I will. I don't think that was really for me. But his more, his later stuff, particularly when he did Rushmore, and he, personified a different kind of character, and then he was able to take it, into something that was serious, but it was much more, human feeling than Razor's Edge, and it was Lost in Translation. I think that was amazing, but I think these are different facets of Murray. I think you could no longer say he's just a different kind of actor. I don't think, for example, that Dan Aykroyd is a serious actor.
He's like Tom Hanks that way. Tom Hanks is like completely two different people.
Well, and it's possible that Razor's Edge, to be honest with you, I'm not being fair, because I remember certain things about Razor's Edge were pretty good, and I think it's possible that it takes that a star, and he was a real comedy star, it probably takes a lot to turn the battleship of a comedy star's career so that people are on board with you doing other stuff. And
well, he did. I think the smart thing he has done with his quote unquote dramatic career is that he
stuff,
well, but there's still an element of comedy there, and he's basically playing character. He's playing a character part that just happens to be the lead character.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
I agree, Drew. I mean, I don't think it. I think he did you have to remind me of the name of the picture. He did one where he was with De Niro, and Uma Thurman, and the premise was that a guy, and I forget what he did. A guy saved the life of a mafia boss, and the mafia boss, as a way of paying him back, gives him a prostitute who is Uma Thurman. Now, what's interesting is they're playing cross characters, because you've got De Niro isn't the mafia boss. He's the straight man. He's the guy who saved the mafia boss. And the mafia boss is Bill Murray. And you're looking
what
at
is
him,
the name of that?
I
don't remember the movie.
At any minute, he's going to be funny, which is really the thing that you kind of expected. You couldn't buy this threatening.
Terrence of Mad Dog and Glory, is that it?
That's it, Mad Dog and Glory, yeah.
It's very strange. Unlike the Wes Anderson stuff, where you had, some drama, and you had funny bits, you had quirkiness, you had elements to it that kind of played to maybe not just his strengths, but also our expectations. But and I think it's fighting expectation. This is just you looked at it and went, I don't know what to make of this. This is
we could definitely do Groundhog Day on this podcast without stretching much, and because it's definitely genre, and he's so good in that. You really make him feel for you in that. We did
Make him feel
Scrooged, and
Scrooge was good.
Yeah, and he was so wonderful in Scrooge.
Yeah.
So he's a very powerful performer. I also, speaking of what's become of these guys, all of them have had great careers. Harold Ramis has remained a powerhouse. He writes and produces a lot. He's still in a lot of movies, although he does not look remotely like himself. Out of all of these guys, Harold Ramis is the one who resembles himself the least. Because when you saw him in Knocked Up, and he played Seth Rogen's dad, and he's wonderful. He looks like this sort of doughy, white-haired old guy, and
right. Yeah, you began to see him change in, I think, Orange County.
I don't think I saw Orange County, but
where he was like, Go ahead.
Yeah, he started. He's just getting older and filling out, and he's become this sort of great stocky character actor. And Dan Aykroyd, who you and I were talking recently, he was so good in Dragnet. There's real talent in Dan Aykroyd, and Dan Aykroyd mainly does dramas now. When you see Dan Aykroyd turn up, he's usually doing a character part in a drama. We just saw him in the Liberace movie, and
oh, is he in that? I have that on TV. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. He plays the loyal lawyer of Liberace.
Although I will say, one night when I was on Sunset, saw him going down the back staircase of House of Blues, and he was taking out the trash.
Really?
And I was like, wow, it's Bill Murray taking out the trash.
That is awesome.
That is crazy. Awesome. I was like, oh, okay. But, sometimes you see things that he does that also kind of match up with some of the things, like what you said earlier, Jason, about, him talking to a scientist about maybe how you would catch ghosts. He shows up in some interesting sort of, I've got paranormal theories. Kind of.
No, that was Drew who told that story, but yeah. He did a Canadian X-Files show kind of thing. It was like an anthology hosted by Dan Aykroyd. I remember this because there was a period where like everybody and their dog had an X-Files-ish kind of project.
Right.
And because, David Hasselhoff had one where he was fighting monsters at night on Baywatch Nights. And Dan Aykroyd had one that was like it was literally an X-Files-ish sort of anthology series, if I recall correctly. And he literally hosted it. He also played the moonshot-obsessed genius in Sneakers. I mean, he's great. Dan Aykroyd just turned out to be fantastic,
Wow, you pulled out Sneakers.
Sneakers is well worth revisiting, my friend. Sneakers.
No, I know. It's like I have a weird place in my heart for that movie.
Slate, for what it's worth, Slate magazine, which is like my favorite. What's that? Right. No, Slate last year dedicated like a week of feature articles to Sneakers, to the fact that it was the 20th anniversary of that show. And the funniest thing was, as they had all these different feature articles about Sneakers, probably more than anybody's ever written about the movie, the editor would introduce them and get increasingly apologetic with, I'm not really certain why I assigned a feature article a day on the 20th anniversary of Sneakers, but here's another one. And it was really great. Okay, we certainly should wrap this up because now we've gone so far afield that I'm not even sure what we were discussing. Oh, yes, Ghostbusters. So, okay, let's do our final thoughts, and then we'll come around for endorsements. And I think we
will. Factor, yeah.
Yep, it was Drew, and then Adam, and then Joy, and then me. So, Drew, final thoughts, Ghostbusters.
I will never have final thoughts on Ghostbusters. I will be thinking about this movie on my deathbed, I'm sure.
Wow.
This is one of the movies that made me want to. Actually, what this movie made me want to do is be a Ghostbuster. But when I figured out that wasn't really a job, I decided that I would write instead. And talking about this movie, I'm probably going to watch it again as soon as I'm done with the podcast. I love this movie.
All right, awesome. Adam, any final thoughts, Ghostbusters?
Like I said earlier, I think the movie still really kind of holds up. It definitely is it's kind of a lens to look at, these kind of pictures back, in the time that it was released. And I think it holds up even kind of well today. We didn't get to sort of like how New York has changed, from then to now. But it's almost doesn't matter. It exists in its own sort of parallel dimension. But it all sort of works. It's a great movie. The story, I think as it turned out, was a really good story. And Drew, I like your idea of it being sort of a template for a Fantastic Four. So I think it's still a great seminal picture, particularly for a cross-genre sort of mashup of comedy and horror, comedy and sci-fi. I mean, these are different elements that can be sort of put together in a way that isn't really dark, but it airs more on the side of comedy, as opposed to Evil Dead, which is a little bit darker, a good deal more darker and sort of sardonic. And it's, I think this is one of those films that, I hate to say it, it's sort of like Citizen Kane or Lawrence of Arabia or early, Marx Brothers pictures, or, there are key pictures that you look at and you say, look, you need to see these pictures if you're going to kind of have a working sort of understanding or a lexicon of go-to films, for particular genres. And I think this is one of them that really works. And I can say that really I don't think anyone's going to really contest that. So it's still a tremendous, tremendous picture. And, I really enjoy seeing it, even nowadays.
Very cool. Julia, final thoughts? Ghostbusters?
Oh, I have nothing to add from what we said already. It's just a fun movie, and I'm looking forward to showing the rest of it to the girls. I didn't want them to see it so late at night because I didn't want them to have nightmares. But
well, Julia should be happy because there's like zero blood in this picture. Which made it one of the
movies. I'm the one who wanted to do the horror comedy because to me, horror, just the fact that it's comedy makes it less horrific.
Well, I mean, Evil Dead is technically a horror comedy with a lowercase c, and there's a huge amount of blood in that.
That's true.
It's a pretty broad definition. There's a lot of, and I think that's what's exciting about doing this. But you mentioned there's no blood. This is the movie that introduced us to the concept of when you can't do gore, do slime.
Yeah, good point.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I also have no final thoughts on Ghostbusters other than it's been really fun to revisit it and spend time actually talking about it at length. And it's one of those ones that you could probably write whole books about because we've talked about a lot of stuff here, but there's really just so much more that we can continue going on about. So let's go around and do do endorsements. By the way, before we do endorsements, I just want to say I'm so excited about this retrospective. I think the whole concept of a comedy horror retrospective is going to be hugely fun. But all right, endorsements. Drew, what do you have for us?
Well, two things. There's a personal thing and a impersonal thing. Impersonal first, I saw Man of Steel. I know it's a hotly debated thing right now among fandom, but I have to say I think it's a really good reboot of the character. It's zero nostalgia, so if you're wanting like that nostalgic Superman, probably not for you, and I totally get why it's upsetting. That's upsetting with some people. Me as a fan, I like seeing different interpretations of these characters, and as of that, I greatly enjoyed it. But it's ultra slick. Yeah, it's very ultra slick and very ultra modern. Personal endorsement, and I already took the liberty of posting the link on the Facebook today. My wife's band, Danger Cakes, is doing an Indiegogo campaign, and they are trying to raise money for not only their upcoming tour, but for some music videos. And
so what is
even if
Indiegogo? Is that's a
it's similar to Kickstarter, but it's actually better set up because if you don't raise your goal with Kickstarter gets to keep all that money, whereas with Indiegogo, the people, even if you don't reach your goal, you still get to keep the money. So, which is a nice difference, I think. Even if you can just give $1 or $2, please go look at their video that's on there. Donate $1, donate $2. If you can donate more, they have some wonderful prizes that they're giving away. And these girls, I said this last time, these are some of the hardest working people I know. And they really absolutely deserve your attention and your respect, and just see what they're doing for at the risk of sounding Pollyanna-ish, what they're doing for women in the music industry. So please check it out. The link is on our Facebook, and I'm sure you could venture over to their Facebook as well.
Awesome.
Very cool. Julia? Oh, wait, no. I'm sorry. Adam, we'll go to you. Endorsements. What do you have for us?
Actually, I am endorsing two things. Mostly it's sort of on things to watch. I know I had endorsed Hannibal, I think, a couple of weeks back, and I'm sort of liking that. But if you haven't been watching House of Cards on Netflix, really finding that a very interesting series, not just because it was sort of published or released exclusively through Netflix, but also because, Spacey's in it, and it's it's based on, I think, initially as an English version of it. But a fascinating series, and he's really good in it. And the format of the show is gripping and really interesting, and I like it a lot. So, and the other thing, I started rewatching. I only seen 1 or 2 episodes. I started watching Carnival, which was a HBO series back a number of years ago, which is sort of like the first in a line of these kind of long-running, interesting shows that took some risks. You know, like later with an AMC, with Walking Dead or Mad Men or whatever else. There was, this series and Sopranos and other things on HBO. But I was sort of watching Carnival, and it's sort of an interesting series that Ronald Moore was doing stuff in it pretty early on, who later on went to go do things with Galactica and whatever else. You could sort of see some of the underpinnings of what he would do later, I think, coming out of this. And so,
I remember it. I do. I remember. I mean, I didn't watch the show all the time, but because I didn't have HBO at the time. But I remember some friends showing it to me, and it's really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I started watching it on Netflix, and it's interesting to go back to a series like that. So I think just to push the Netflix button, I suppose. Those 2 shows are actually pretty interesting.
Very cool. Julia, do you have any endorsements for us?
Sure. Well, I'll add on to the Netflix endorsements, Breaking Bad, which we've been devouring at the feverish rate of 2 episodes a night for the last 2 weeks. And then I also want to endorse our 2 teammates, podcast mates, Jason Henderson and Tony Salvaggio, put out the English version of their Clockworks graphic novel with humanoids, and it's funny because they wrote it in English, and then it got translated to French and put out in France, and then they somehow, I guess because of how, Jason, you can correct me on this, but I guess because of how the art was done, somehow the English panels no longer worked, and so then they had to rewrite it from the French translation. Like somebody translated it back into English, and then they had to rewrite to fit the art that they had now. And now they've put it. Now it's finally out in the United States in English.
That's correct. The version that came out this week is by us. I mean, but it is our rewrite of an English translation of a French script translated from an English script written by me and Tony. So the version is not the script that we originally wrote. It is literally our rewrite of a 3rd or 4th generation translation. And actually, for all that, I think it came out pretty well. And I love it. It's beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful books I've ever had come out. So thank you for mentioning it. That's very kind of you. What I love is that it has the main character is this one-armed girl, and she's like really tough, and she has MacGyver powers. She can sort of make it.
And they were on a podcast. Jason and Tony were on a podcast talking about it this week. It's what is it? The Breaking the Fourth Wall? Is that what it's called?
Yes, that's right. It was called Breaking the Fourth Wall.
Clockworks, CLOCKWERX.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. All right. So my endorsement is Night Call, which is an episode of Twilight Zone that was written by Richard Matheson, who died today. And Richard Matheson is a writer who just is extraordinarily important to me because he, we hear people say all the time that you have to pick what you're going to write. You're going to write comics, you're going to write games, you're going to write novels or whatever. And Richard Matheson basically just said, no, that's just not true. You can write whatever the heck you want. And so Matheson wrote novels. He wrote Hell House, which is one of my favorite novels. He wrote, What Dreams May Come. He wrote I Am Legend, which became the Omega Man. He wrote many, many episodes of The Twilight Zone. He wrote lots of screenplays. He was just extraordinarily prolific and died today at the age of 87. And so if you're going to go get anything, I think, Omega Man would be great. But Night Call, which is just this episode of The Twilight Zone about a woman who is getting mysterious phone calls. And
I know this one. That's a great one.
Yeah. So I won't say any more about it other than that it was directed by Jacques Tourneur, who is the director of Cat People. So yeah, that's my. There's a million more where that came from, but that's just a good way into the world of Richard Matheson. So, this has been the beginning of our comedy retrospective. We're going to be coming back next week. I can't remember what the next one is, whether it's Love at First Bite or whether it's, what. But we're going to be doing some really great stuff. There are so many comedy horror movies that the hardest part is going to be for us to pick like just 5 or so to do. And probably we'll do a few, and then when we finally feel like we've exhausted that, we'll quit for a while and go back and do more. And other retrospectives coming up, of course, we're eventually going to get back to Stephen King. So, all right, guys. I really appreciate you being on. Adam, enjoy New York. I know it's very late out there. Everybody, thank you so much. And everybody, if you're listening, Facebook, like us on Facebook, like us on iTunes, leave reviews, tell your friends, tweet, share, do whatever. All right. Thanks, everybody. Darren says you should also watch True Blood because it's back. And good night. Bye.
Good night.